Okay, hi everybody, good morning, and thanks very much for inviting me to talk. We've got quite a bit to get through today, so I do have a timer going in my computer, so I may have to, you may see me increasingly rush through the slides. Talking about VR glaciers and glaciated landscapes, pedagogy and technology. There will be a demonstration. But as I said, quite a bit to get through, including somewhat self-indulgently a virtual field trip manifesto towards the end that builds on some of this. So what is VR Glaciers? It was launched in 2018 with funding from the Quaternary Research Association, the British Society for Germophology, and also mostly the University of Worcester. And it's a collection of 13 virtual field trips, mostly to Switzerland, but also to the English Lake District and the Sierra Nevada in California. Critically, they are provided without interpretation. That's very important for the pedagogic side that I will come back to shortly. And they're designed to work in a range of devices. In other words, there's no plugin or anything else required in order for them to run. Why did I develop it? Well, I think there's a perception that the topic of glaciers and glaciation is challenging. It's tricky to introduce and engage with in the classroom because these sort of environments to students may seem unfamiliar and remote. The solution is, of course, real field work, but as we all know, there are a range of reasons why that might not happen. But when I was developing VR Glaciers, but before I was thinking about pandemics or anything, I was aware that when we learn about glaciers and glaciation in school, college, university, any fieldwork that's there to support it usually occurs at some point later in the academic year. It may not occur at all. If it does occur, it might take place in some other type of environment that's more challenging to interpret. So VR Glaciers is a solution to that perceived problem, and specifically it provides ground level virtual field trips. And the ground level here, the text is in bold simply because I'm trying to draw a distinction between this and Google Earth Tours, which provide fly-throughs, and which of course are also great. So VR Glacier supports in-class learning. That's the most important thing, but it also can prepare students for real field work for which there is no substitute. So we'll do a demonstration now. So we'll go to the website and fingers crossed this will all mostly work. Here we go. Good. Okay, so this is the website itself. It's all fairly straightforward. The home page of VR Glaciers, we've got a nice, he says less modestly, a nice video that talks you through what VR Glaciers and glaciated landscapes are about. There's a link to a forum as well. I've got some free resources if you want to use it for teaching. And then it's a link to various virtual field trips. They're all designed broadly the same way, so I'm just going to click on the first one. That's the Arolla Valley in Switzerland. That's a well-known field trip destination certainly for geography departments in the UK. All designed the same way, so we have this list of what I think might be the themes that can be explored in the Arolla Valley. We scroll down a little bit and we see some text describing and some photos describing the area, mostly location and topography. There is, of course, a map. So you can see where it is in relation to, well, anywhere else. And the big orange button is a link to the field trip, which we'll look at in a second. In addition, we also have links to additional related resources. All the virtual field trips include related resources, but they will vary depending on location. So let's have a look. So here we go. This is so the opening, each virtual field trip, the screens is designed the same way. It's a split screen. The main screen is what you see at ground level. So I'm left clicking my mouse and dragging in the direction I want to look at. The right hand side is the map pane, or in this case, we've got satellite imagery. So what I'm going to do is we click in the yellow button. That takes us to the next side. You've seen all this sort of thing before. it's a little bit like a street view. I'm going through the forest because a number of you are ecologists. Appreciate you may prefer trees rather than the moraines that I may prefer myself. So we can kind of zoom in and out. The map pane, we can also zoom in and we can see our location on the map pane, and we also can tell the direction in which we're facing. This rotating radar type icon there shows us which way we're looking, and we can use the right hand map pane in order to navigate if we as well, just to jump some sites if that's what we would like to do. To make it a little bit more immersive, I recommend going into sort of full screen mode and also getting rid of the map as well. So that's a nice way. And in this case, the bigger the screen, the better. I'm going to come out of here and we're going to go back to some of the additional resources. So here we've got location data. So if you're using GIS software, if you're using Google Earth, ArcMap, ArcGIS Pro, QGIS, whatever it is, we have files for you to download. And that shows you the location of each stop within the software. I was going to demonstrate that to show you how easy it is, but I am mindful of the time, so I'm going to keep on going. Also, with the Arolla Valley, we have I discovered this old virtual field trip on my computer from 2006. And it's a nice example of being able to jump back in time and capture change in what's a dynamic, rapidly changing environment. So here, all this ice is now gone. Apologies for these somewhat posed students there. And there's lots of ice in that far side of the valley within that moraine. That is all gone as well. So you can see the benefits. I'll get rid of that. Swiss Topo website, fantastic. It will open up on the actual location, so you don't need to look around. This is available for free, and we can enable journeys through time. And this map is from middle of the 19th century, showing glaciers when they were at their most recent maximal extent, part of the so-called Little Ice Age period. And you can access geology. There's vegetation maps in there as well. Swiss Glacier Monitoring website for that glacier if you want to do something a little bit more numerical. And then we've got the AB Alpine website. I'll just quickly, this is from University of Lausanne, and we'll search for Arolla. And you'll see some old photos as well. So this first one here shows the Arolla Valley, 1862, and it just shows you the glacier extent there. So it brings some of these changes to life. I'm going to come back to the presentation now. Okay, so or possibly not. Hold on a second. Here we go. Right. So how is it used for teaching? I do know it's used by many schools, colleges, and universities around the world. What I don't know in detail is the way in which they use it for teaching. So instead, I'm going to cheat a little bit and tell you the various ways in which I use it. And for context, it's worth saying that Geography Worcester does feature a lot of real fieldwork. Well, normally it does. There's residential fieldwork in all 3 years, and most modules also feature field trips in the region as well. And I'm telling you that simply because there's no evidence that virtual field trips have any adverse impact in real fieldwork at all. It supports rather than threatens a real thing, and it also creates opportunities for in-class activities that would not otherwise be possible. And that's what we're going to consider now. I'm not going to go through this list because I'm going to consider each of these teaching assessment type activities in turn. I think the most important way in which I use VR Glaciers and other people use VR Glaciers is to really apply what's just been learned in a lecture or whatever, or in a reading exercise. You can instantly travel to the field. You have that familiar ground level perspective, as I said, as opposed to maybe the Google Earth fly through, and it's great for practicing landform and landscape interpretation skills. And the advantage of virtual fieldwork is you can take students virtually to different environments. So they can see the background image here, for example, is from the Sierra Nevada in California. It's the Big Pine virtual field trip, and the geology and the climate and everything else in the landscape generally is very different from what you'd expect to see in the Alps. In terms of how I do that, I think worksheets work best, and I've got some worksheets I've made available for free. Colleagues are welcome to use those, but you have to log into the forum first. But you can also get students doing group presentations, mapping exercises, all sorts of collaborative activities. I found VR Glaciers also very good for developing spatial literacy skills. So we've got by default the side-by-side comparison of ground level and satellite imagery, which is helpful. And that in turn helps students become aware of issues of its scale and particularly perspective distortion. Looking at the distance, you think a mountain may be, I don't know, triangular shape. In fact, it is different. That's just an issue of perspective. And of course, it works very well alongside GIS software, ArcGIS Pro, Google Earth. So there we go. So I've just had somebody requesting control of the screen, so I'm going to deny that just now. Carry on. Okay, so let's get back on track. Developing spatial literacy skills. Yeah, and this is just a screenshot of the locations of the virtual field trip drop into ArcGIS Pro, which I prefer over ArcMap because the world imagery layer in ArcMap is very slow, but ArcGIS Pro works very, very nicely. So Adi Pope, if he's listening, will be probably pleased to hear that. So assessment, this is my favorite assessment. If you can have a favorite assessment, I get students to produce a geomorphological field guide, very much like the Quaternary Research Association field guides, except much shorter. It's an assignment, typically 2,000 to 3,000 words. Students get to explore a valley and write it up, identify 4 or 5 sites of interest, produce mapping, supporting resources, bring in the literature as well. Some of the best work I've ever marked has come from this type of assignment. Also use VR Glaciers for supporting real field work, good for preparation. I'm saying more effective time in the field. We think that's what literature says. We've never really tested that for sure. But it's also good for follow-up as well as fallback. In the Lake District, for example, it does occasionally rain. So it's useful for those wet weather days. So it's not complete write-off. Time travel. We talked about the Rolla Valley virtual field trip already, but all virtual field trips that are photography based involve some time travel because they are all snapshots in time. Student inclusivity. Here we go. It's a big one. Some of you are particularly, well, I think everybody's interested in this. VR Glaciers is used to help with that. In particular, it helps some students to reduce anxiety levels if they're able to visit some of these locations in advance of real field work. And also, there may be various reasons where in the field they're not able to follow everything that's going on, but the ability to revisit after the field work is ideal. Occasionally and rarely, and as a last option, we will use as an alternative to the real thing, but only for a 3rd year Lake District trip. Yeah, and that's it. We wouldn't use it for any other modules. So technology, how does it all work? It's a photography-based approach. It's not a computer simulation. I've not used a games engine like Unreal or Unity because that's much more expensive. It's more time-consuming to develop, and I would not be able to recreate the complexity of the real world if I used that approach. So they're linked, it's a bit like Google Street View, they're linked photospheres, and there are 3 main stages to development. I'll go through this fairly quickly because there are lots of different ways you can achieve very similar outcomes. What I've used for VR Glaciers is a combination of a digital SLR, use a tripod and something called a panoramic head. And it's the case of just taking 6 photos around and 1 photo looking straight up. And then the imagery gets processed, you stitch them together, and that creates this so-called photosphere, really just an equirectangular image that gets warped around you. Again, similar to Google Street View. And then these individual photospheres get linked together to create tours. And the software I've been using is PanoTour Pro. That was bought by GoPro and shut down, which is frustrating. So now I'm learning Pano2 VR, which is powerful, but not especially user-friendly. So, and each virtual field trip is a mini website. And all of these get uploaded to a server. And you can see here the total virtual field trip size, about 33 gigabytes. So that's a lot of data, in part because you can zoom in and out. The panoramas are multi-resolution. So it's a bit like, again, like Google Earth. As you zoom in, more detailed data is loaded. VR Glaciers website itself is simply a WordPress site. It's simply a collection site. So you could use anything. You could list it all in a Word document if that's what you wanted to do. So how's it gone so far? It was worth remembering that VR Glaciers was developed primarily to support teaching of glaciers and glaciation schools, colleges, and universities. I've not undertaken any pedagogic research. I'm sorry to say that's something of a kind of blind spot for me. Currently, I do need to work with somebody to try and do some pedagogic research. I can tell you, though, that it is being used. So you can see growing use here, 6,600, suspiciously round number, but that's what we've had so far this year, and I expect that number will grow somewhat more before the end of the year. Most visitors are from the UK and the USA. And desktop is the most popular type of device. People aren't using their phones or tablets quite so much. And when people visit the site, it's mostly in groups from the same location. So I think that they're classes using rather than individuals having a look at the virtual field trip resources. I have had unsolicited feedback from folks, so from teachers. I'm going to move forward from this slide very quickly, so I do apologise if you start reading and I change it. Positive feedback from teachers, also from university staff as well. I've had a few emails in after lockdown, so people appreciate that opportunity, and students seem to like it as well. I'd like to flag up the top left quote, and the student saying, the main thing I learned using the virtual field trips is that real life landforms are rarely as clear as the ones in the books, and that's important. VR Glaciers needs more work if we're going to support the teaching of glaciers and glaciation in school. That's a bit of a challenge. I need to have more environments than I have, and it's a bit more than geomorphology. And I've got lots of drone footage that I'm sitting on that I need to include. Self-indulgent phase, I appreciate I'm beginning to run out of time here. Virtual field trip manifesto. So number one, include virtual field trips in your curriculum to create teaching and assessment opportunities that would not otherwise be possible. I think I've covered that already with the examples I provided. So number two, if you can, it's easier said than done, underpin residential field work with virtual field trips. It does provide you with a bit of flexibility, especially in the case of global pandemics. Number three, recognise the opportunities and limitations of virtual field trips for addressing inclusivity issues. Virtual field trips may well be the right option for people who generally cannot participate in real field work, but they should be the last option. Really, there are certain things that you simply can't reproduce virtually, as we heard previously. It takes a lot of work, so do consider collaborating in the development of virtual field trips, and I'd like to recommend the Virtual Paleosciences project. Simon's doing a talk on that a little bit later. The technology should be appropriate to you, so it may well be mobile phones or a 360 camera. You can do things cheaply and easily. The key thing is you can, as long as you can update the resources, because the one thing I can guarantee you is resources will break over time as technology moves. Sixthly, and finally, mind your language. Do not inadvertently undermine real or virtual field work. They're clearly not equivalents. And I would say a little bit more about that, but I can see my 20 or so minutes is up. So I'm going to round off there. And finally, I wasn't sure how to round it off, so one of two things. Firstly, virtual fieldwork can be so much more than just a fieldwork fix or a fallback when real fieldwork is not possible. That's the most important thing. Secondly, if you look at the literature, and apologies, I've not referred to that at all, but virtual fieldwork concepts have not changed much in the last 20 to 25 years. What has changed is technology and our ability to realize the potential for virtual field trips. And that's the key thing here. I'd like to round off by thanking many people, University of Worcester, QR, etc. You can read that for yourself, organisations and individuals. Also like to thank you for listening. Thanks to the conference organisers for inviting me to speak at this event. And that's that. So I will stop there and I will stop taking control if I remember how to do that. So I'm going to pass back over, fingers crossed, to Derek.
Yes.
In Chester. I can say a little bit more about number 6 if you want, but I don't know how to say my welcome.
Thanks, Des. That was really great. Excellent summary of VR and Glaciers. We've got a few minutes between the next session starting, so we're open to questions to either Paul or Des about their presentations. I've got one. I'll keep my question. Where's the question? I can't find it.
We had a question from Catherine Lee. There were 2 from Catherine Lee in the chat.
Okay.
So the first one was about, let me just go back and find it, about how you define sort of terminology around field trips and field excursions. And thinking that field trips involve more data sample and data collection and using field equipment and so on, whereas field excursions are more like visits. She was interested in sort of how you distinguish between the 2.
Yeah, okay, good question. I don't really, maybe I should. I've not really given it much thought. Students using VR Glaciers in my modules are engaging in the landscape, but because it's a more geomorphology based type thing, they are looking, they are mapping, so they are doing things anyway, so it's not a passive look around, so they are doing more than that. I think the point's a good one. Kim Davis from Bournemouth was talking to me about this a few months ago, and she said, and I'm going to paraphrase, yeah, marines are all very good, but wouldn't it be great if you also included some ecological succession data on these newly exposed terrains as the glaciers are retreating, and additional data as well. We could do something like econometry, so it would be good to include that data as well. So in answer to the question, no, I'm not really making a distinction in terminology. I am aware that students ought to be doing something, but the fact they're blank virtual field trips leaves it very flexible, but I should get some more in there if I can, but I do need people's help to do that. I don't know if that answers.
Thanks, Des. I think it answers the question well. You teased us a little bit with one of your last slides about the real against virtual. You had a view on it, but didn't want to dominate. But I was tempted to probe a bit further.
Yeah, I was a little bit disappointed. I was running out of time and didn't want to be that person who had to be stopped and dragged from the room virtually while still talking.
This time, yeah.
So very quickly, I think it's a reasonable prediction that with increasing budgetary pressures, concerns about environmental impact of particular long-haul destinations, inclusivity concerns, there's going to be a spotlight shone on the viability of some of our existing real fieldwork provision. And there are real dangers here, and it's important that we don't misrepresent virtual fieldwork as somehow as an equivalent to the real thing, even though many of us have possibly been using virtual fieldwork as the replacement for the real thing, because otherwise, and if you've already been doing that for inclusion purposes, this student wasn't able to get out in the field, but we're providing an equivalent experience by this virtual field trip. The danger is there's a budget holder who might say, well, actually, if it's good enough for this student who can't participate in real fieldwork, maybe it's good enough for everybody. Think about the environment, think about the costs. And also undermining virtual field trips is not a solution either, because it does no favours to students with disabilities or caring responsibilities who may have no option other than to rely on virtual fieldwork. I think virtual field trips can be in many respects superior in some respects the real thing, but there's obviously other gaps in terms of social interaction, the experience of walking across a talus slope, whatever it is. So I guess I'm cautioning against the realities facing us and the dangers of undermining people who have to rely on virtual field work, but also undermining real field work. Yeah, it's complicated, and it means you've got to think about what you say and how you use the terminology. Does that help a bit?
Yes, thanks, Des. It really does. Time for one more question before we hand over to Julian. So we go to session 1. I've got a question. Oh, go on.
There's a question from Paul Bailey just further up in the chat. He asked, has anyone else contributed to the resources and development outside of your universities at all your own work?
Everybody's gone quiet.
I think the question from Paul Bailey was, has anyone else contributed to the resources and development, for example, outside of your university, or is it all your own work?
I do apologise. I thought it was a question for Paul rather than me.
No,
so that's
no,
why that's why I was ignoring it. I was thinking, all right. Sorry, Paul. Yeah, it's no, that's a lie. It is mostly me. The California ones were undertaken with support with University of California at Davis, the Centre for Watershed Sciences. Ian Maddock helped out with that too. Otherwise, I think it's mostly mine. I've not done all that work since 2018. Some of these were pre-existing ones that I kind of put in. This is done on top of the day job, so to speak. So no, I'm looking to collaborate. Collaborate's the way forward. I am the epitome of not collaborating so far, I'm afraid. But I'm hoping to rectify that through working with the virtual paleosciences project, and also anyone else who can cope with me.
Thanks, Des.